Well, hello. Well, hello. Well, hello. We're back. We're back, Mike Manley. What's going
We're
on?
still, hitting the refresh on my browser every 30 seconds, see if there's any updates.
You can see everybody that we're a little distracted tonight. Welcome to Pencil to Pencil.
Oh my God.
There happens to be something going on in the United States tonight. So we may be a little distracted tonight, but we'll have fun with it. I hope everybody's well.
Yeah.
I'm Jamar Nicholas, man of many nicknames, cartoonist in good standing, and the Kevin Bacon of comic books. Welcome to Pencil. I'm joined, as always, by my best bud, and I'm going to say it, Mike. I know you hate it. Modern Master of comic books. Modern Master. Modern Master of comic books. Michael Manley. Hello, Mike. How are you?
I'm not a master.
I'm not a master. Welcome everybody back to the podcast, your favorite pandemic podcast, which is now weekly. Mike, I can see a little spark in your eye. I don't know. Has having your Saturdays off, has that helped you out a little bit?
What's a Saturday?
With a far off look in your eye.
I'm a cartoonist. What is a Saturday?
What's a weekend, right? And you know what? Maybe we'll talk about that, because I was talking to another cartoonist earlier today about just, you're seeing a lot of people talk about everything just crashing together. You have no idea what day it is anymore. But is that something cartoonists go through? Hey Terry, how are
you? I do think so. I mean, you have your delivery schedule.
Yeah.
And I have the two strips, so I have delivery dates for the dailies and delivery date for the Sunday. So that kind of regulates you, almost like those are dates that you have to hit as close as possible.
Yeah.
Sort of like when you were going to school, you have to be, up at a certain time, and but in between, everything is, very flexible. And I think that with our current the COVID and everything, it's just like everybody's, then the daylight savings time, and you already adjust for that, and then like everybody was trying to drink themselves to sleep last night. I was zooming up until the wee hours, with some of our mutual friends last night, and then you try to go to bed, and you get the racing brain.
Yeah,
that's what happens with me. I might get really tired.
Yeah,
physically tired, but my brain
runs. Well, you know what helps? If you run some scotch across your gums, out like a light.
I guess I've never been a guy who was like a big drinker. And I don't. I mean, I have had scotch, but I'm not a man of a certain generation who like, I can't wait to sit down after dinner and have my 5 o'clock. Yeah, no, I'm not like. I almost never drink socially.
Yeah,
but I never drink at home.
Mm-hmm.
I never like just go sit down and drink and have a beer and watch TV. I've never done it.
Yeah, I think it might be a control thing, and maybe we'll talk about that. Let's give some housekeeping and get our guy in here. Welcome everybody to the podcast. As I said earlier, before we were doing 2 episodes a week on Wednesdays and Saturdays, because of daylight savings time, everybody being super busy, and also the winter solstice happening. I just made that part up. We decided to cut back to just Wednesdays. So thanks everybody for keeping up with us. I think the energy is really high, which is great. So maybe there's something to be said about doing one a week. I spoke too soon. So everybody that's watching us for the first time, hello. If you're watching live on YouTube, hello. Facebook, the same. If you'd like to interact with myself or Mike or our guest, please go into the comments or the chat, depending on where you are, and type something in. If it's a statement, try to get to it. If it's a question, that's really going to help get your chances up. So
no screen.
So tonight we have a very special guest. It is kind of apropos that it's like election eve. Well, I guess it's like post-election eve, right?
Post, yes.
our good buddy Jim Borgman, who was the editorial cartoonist at the Cincinnati Enquirer for a long period of time. But you may know him from his run on ZITS that he does with Jerry Scott. I got the chance to interview Jim a long time ago in Draw Magazine. It was one of my favorite interviews. And Jim was a sweetheart and let me ask him all types of stupid questions, and he never hung up the phone on me, so that's a good thing. So, we kept in touch and we kept it going. And now that we're live in video, we figured we'd catch up with him and see what's going on with him now. So let's bring him on in. Jim Borgman. Hello, sir.
Hey, guys. It's really good to be with you.
Thank you. You as well.
All eyes of the nation are on this podcast tonight, I think.
No pressure.
From the cradle of liberty.
That's right.
That's right.
We said to Jim before we came on air that I think it might be Mike and I holding up the election. So once we're finished with the podcast, we'll take care of it.
That's right. We'll go count a few more things.
Count some more votes. Yeah.
Now, did you draw just for fun some political cartoons for yourself today?
You would think, and I'm asked a lot of times, especially during this last 4 years, do you miss political cartooning? But the truth is, when I set it down in 2008, I don't think I ever came up with another cartoon idea.
Really?
Isn't that weird? It was like flipping off a switch. And I remain an involved citizen, and I want to, know what's going on in the world and do my part to affect it. But it's like, I don't know, it must have, in retrospect, I guess it must have been a very conscious process I put myself through each day to come up with visual ways of saying what was on my mind. And for whatever reason, the fairies lost my address and they stopped coming and giving me those things. So I'm like you guys, I'm like everybody, I guess. I watch and I care and I do what I can do, but I have not once drawn the current president in my life.
Really? Not even back in the day?
No, I don't think so. He didn't have a whole lot of effect on Cincinnati, Ohio back then.
Right. But also the climate of political cartooning changed so much from when you put your pen down to now. I mean, everybody got broadsides from the political cartoonists back in the day.
That's true enough. Yeah. Well, there was air in the room at the time. There was enough ink to go around, but not anymore. I mean, it's turned into the spotlight is very fierce and bright now. And I don't know if I would have played around the edges the way I used to like to do very well during this. I never really loved. I mean, I enjoyed drawing the presidents and stuff, but that really wasn't where my passion was when I was a political cartoonist. I used to like to see how the news sort of drifted down into the lives of people. And I did lots and lots of scenes of these kind of big, doughy Ohio type people in their houses talking about how things had kind of drifted down to affect their lives. And that's where I enjoyed. That was my playground. I loved that stuff. So focusing on the Donald Trumps, and other celebrities that wasn't my wheelhouse.
So you didn't get your savage knife out like Pat Oliphant, and really go after people.
He was the master. Well, I don't know. Do you want to talk about this stuff now? I thought it was. When I started out, and I started my job in '76 in Cincinnati at the paper, and at that time the biggies in the business were Oliphant, McNally, Paul Conrad was still doing it out at the LA Times, Herblock at the Washington Post, and the kind of the sort of motto, the macho motto around political cartooning was, it's your job to get people pissed off and stir them up. And, you should be digging every day and all that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And I tried that. and found that it wasn't really me. I mean, when the events, made it appropriate, I hope I had that in my arsenal. But day to day, I always thought that was sort of sociopathic to just try to make people angry for no good reason.
Mhm.
I liked expressing my view, but I also liked turning the rock over and looking at the other side of it and seeing how the light reflected off, and just probing. I'm liberal arts major from college. I just enjoy like teasing it all out, and I never really thought that the idea was to put down your stake and then defend it. My approach was more to, check it out, see what it felt like, think about other points of view, explore those, and over time, arrive at what seemed to me my best shot.
Do you think that the staking out your claim was kind of like the old school way of doing it? The old political cartoonists were, they get pretty, they get right in there, and really kind of mix it up. But it seemed like the politicians were also sort of expecting that in a way, like their skin was thicker.
Yeah, they had enemies lists, and cartoonists were on them sometimes. Yeah, I'd say it's definitely the legacy of the the lineage of editorial cartooning to have that kind of venom, and I wouldn't say it changed. In my era, there was definitely more humor brought to it in the 70s and 80s and 90s. I think McNally and Mike Peters and Mike Lukovich and folks like that had a stronger comic vein than had Herb Block and Conrad, those kind of folks. But I think now I look at some folks who are out there now, and they can do it too. They're it's a great strength as a political cartoonist to be able to bring that. It just wasn't my particular strength on many occasions.
Do you think that generation you were talking about was influenced by like Mad Magazine?
Yeah.
And that attitude that you would see, because that was probably, as I imagine, really the first thing that really openly mocked everybody. Everything was fair game in Mad. The president, all the movie stars, everybody was. So I'm wondering if that sort of, starting in the 50s, where you were poking at fun at the institutions, if that affected the generation right before you, and so it sort of moved down.
Well, if I had to choose one person to say influenced me to become a cartoonist, it would be Mort Drucker from Mad. And I confess it was more stylistic than anything, but whatever door you come in doesn't matter. You can come in through the window or the door or the back door. Once you're in there, you start playing and exploring and developing, and that's where I did. I don't know, but you guys are probably much younger than me. But when I was in school, Mad Magazine, the nuns would take that out of your hands if they found you reading Mad Magazine.
I lost many copies of Mad to the teacher because I'd have it in my math book, and
yeah. Imagine the day when that felt subversive,
Right. And now you look at it and you go like, wow, this is like, as my old professor in college would say, that's like mother's milk. It's so benign and so nurturing and good almost compared to.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, you were talking about kind of like I don't want to say a softer side of political cartooning, but kind of turning it more to the emotional, like, and kind of connecting with the people. Here in Philly, I wonder if you ever crossed paths with Tony Off when he was still around.
Yeah.
And Signe Wilkinson is a good friend of ours, and we had her on a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
And kind of the same kind of energy I think they have.
Well, when I was coming up, and I'm just a mini generation behind the Oliphant and McNally. I mean, like 4 or 5 years behind them. But when I was starting to discover political cartooning when I was in college, there were 5 guys above the altar, and that was, well, I don't know if I counted. Oliphant, McNally, Mike Peters, Tony Auth, and Doug Marlette. Mm-hmm. Those were the 5, saints I prayed to. And yeah, so I got to know Tony pretty well. Tony came to my house. We did a drawing together that's out there in the ether somewhere, where we had all of our characters on the same page.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, those guys were a real inspiration, and each one brought something different to the table. McNally had that like goofy, loopy take on things. Oliphant could be as sharp as anybody. I mean, mm-hmm. You didn't even know you were being cut up, and you were all in pieces. Peters just has that wonderful, wacky way about him. He's just, I hope you've had him on your show. He's wonderful.
No, I'd love to have him on. I love his line. It's so good.
Yeah. And Tony, Tony Auth, I mean, always had a different kind of take. He didn't come out of the same chute as the rest of us from the Mad Magazine sort of mm-hmm. look of things. He had a simpler style. Mm-hmm. And I think it took a lot of guts to march to his own drummer that way when, the generation was kind of monolithic in a different style. Mm-hmm. And then Tony was doing his own thing. And Marlette just always was a very intellectual, smart, he had a way of pulling back the curtain and seeing what was behind it. So anyway, I couldn't have been in a better generation to learn from those guys. And then the way was paved. Every newspaper had a political cartoonist. And, I wander into my hometown newspaper, the Cincinnati Enquirer, in my senior year of college and say, hey, do you guys want a cartoonist? And amazingly, a guy named L.D. Warren, who had been there in that seat for 30 years, I think, had just retired.
Wow.
I mean, it is amazing, because I was naive as can be. I did not strategize anything. Mm-hmm. Just a buddy said, you should let them know you're out here and what you're doing. And so I sent my dozen political cartoons that I had ever drawn in my life into the editor of the Enquirer. And the story's a little longer than that. They came from several directions that happened onto his desk at the same time. And I think he just thought the stars had lined up. Here's a local guy. We can form him into what we want him to be. And they hired me. I started a week after college graduation.
Wow. What were the cartoons do you remember what the cartoons were that you sent in?
The one I remember that had a little bit of tooth to it was at Kenyan College, a little Kenyan college in Central Ohio, where I went to school. There were no pets allowed on campus. And during the summer, somebody who was staying on campus, once a student probably painting dorm rooms, brought a cat. And the security discovered the cat and shot it. Shot it.
Oh my God.
In this little rural town in Ohio. So when we all arrived back on campus, it was still the talk. And I did a cartoon of a bunch of cats holed up, like gangsters, Jimmy Cagney or something with Tommy guns and pinstripe suits and stuff, and peering out through the Venetian blinds at security, and some I don't remember the caption, but it was all the talk on campus. That cartoon, it gave me my taste of okay, this can be a kind of cool gig. And so I drew for the school paper that year. And on the basis of my first semester's once a week editorial cartoons, I got the job at the Enquirer in January.
Wow. That's what I was going to ask you next about, kind of like before you got to the Enquirer. Were you like the cartoon darling on campus, or did you stumble into that too? Like how did you get into the paper at first? Was it with the cat strip?
Okay, if you're really asking,
yeah.
The previous year, a friend of mine had written a series of stories about famous Kenyan alumni.
Mm-hmm.
And they were people like Paul Newman, Rutherford B. Hayes, Edwin Stanton. I mean, some really obscure folks. But he asked me if I'd do a caricature to go with each one.
Mm-hmm.
So I got out my David Levine New York Review of Books, which, I had bought, I had subscribed to just to study David Levine's work.
Mm-hmm.
And I drew as close to David Levine as I possibly could, the caricatures of these alumni. And they ran in the paper, and it really doesn't take much to give you that little taste, like, oh, that's a kind of cool thing. I'm not out on a stage. I don't have to be out there personally,
Mm-hmm.
but I can use the things I'm good at, and they kind of get attention and a little bit of praise. And, I had found my home.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So then I don't know how I exactly thought to do a political cartoon, but I guess I asked them, and I was the celebrity cartoonist on campus for about 1 year. And as I graduated, in came a freshman named Bill Watterson.
Wow.
So for 1 year, I was the most famous Kenyan cartoonist.
Wow, that's great.
Did you meet and become friends, or did you show him the ropes?
Yeah, we did become friends. So I told you that the guy who had written that series of famous Kenyan alumni was named Richard West. And some people might know Rich West's name. He was a bit kind of, I guess you'd call him a critic of cartooning. And he established a little magazine for a while called the Puck Papers, and then it had another name, Cartoonist Profile. No, something else. Anyway,
right.
I've forgotten the name of it. But anyway, Rich was the intermediary. So Rich was still a Kenyan. He and I had become fast friends. And now he was kind of ushering in Bill Watterson. And so by mail, basically, Bill and I would exchange our most recent work. I was at the Enquirer. He was doing them for the Kenyan Collegian. We'd send each other our clips and comment. And Bill has always laughed easily and been just a lovely guy, a wonderful guy. And so we had that kind of relationship for his 4 years at Kenyan. And of course, eventually in person and, hanging around his dorm room and my apartment and stuff like that. And you may or may not know, he, after Kenyan, got a internship as the political cartoonist at the Cincinnati Post across the road from me. And it only lasted 6 months. The editor there didn't see his qualities very well and didn't publish much of his stuff. And Bill got frustrated. And anyway, on the side, he was working on comic strips, which were his true love anyway. Mm-hmm. So I got a front row seat while he was developing strip ideas. And, eventually Calvin showed up as a minor character. I don't think I'm talking out of school. I think this is all known to people who care.
Yeah.
But Calvin was a minor walk-on kind of little brother character in some other strip he was doing about kids in college, I think. And, we know the rest of the story.
Yeah. As Paul Harvey would say. I think it's always fascinating when you go back. You find that in comics, we all kind of rub shoulders with each other in a way that that is like talking to you and finding that out. It doesn't sound surprising.
Yeah,
it's cool. It's cool, but it doesn't sound surprising.
Yeah, I know.
Because I would think even in there's probably more comic book artists than there were political cartoonists, and now there's much fewer political cartoonists in papers. But do you bump into people who are still doing it, but doing it online? Because like it's spread out, it's spread out. So there's a lot of, just like comics, there are a lot of people that do comics online that end up becoming very successful, where they couldn't maybe, there might not be a spot at King or United but there's an audience. But there's an audience.
My guy, I look back and realize I just waltzed into the golden era of political cartooning. I mean, these guys I had mentioned ahead of me had made it very popular, and their work was charismatic and accessible. And I think everybody turned to the editorial page to see the editorial cartoon through those years. And then, at the time, all you had to do was jump through one big hoop. It was not an easy hoop, but you had to just find a gig at a newspaper, and then you were set. You'd do 5 or 6 a week, whatever it would be, and if you could get syndicated, you would. But now I think the biggest asset of a political cartoonist is a dining room table where they can, print their T-shirts and their books and mail out their whatever and handle Patreon and all these things. None of that was required in my era. I got to focus. I now appreciate, and didn't then, how fully my attention could be on doing good work. And I don't know how folks are doing it now. I mean, I stay in touch and I hear around the edges, but wow. Their attention has to be so divided on the making a living piece of it all.
And Jim, when you were at the Inquirer, you had kind of like a staff job, so you went into the building, right?
I did, yeah.
You had an office at the Inquirer. Right?
Yes, I did. So from 76 to 99, I was driving downtown every morning, listening to NPR, propping my feet on the desk and coming up with cartoon ideas until about noon, and then drawing the afternoon. I was on the editorial board of the newspaper. I would be in the room when the candidates came through to be interviewed for endorsements. The sports editor would come and ask if I could do the drawing for this hockey special section, all that. And I loved it, but when you're in it, you don't know that it's finite. You don't understand that this is an era and it will pass.
Yeah, and nobody thinks of their era as an era.
No. This is an era, guys, right here, what we're doing. It's the podcast era. Yeah. And I think our generations are maybe more aware of it because things changed drastically in some cases in our era, because the previous generations, guys drew comics for 40, 50, 60 years, retired.
Yeah.
They didn't have to get a fax machine. They didn't have to, none of that. They just sat there and they drew, and when they're done, they packaged it up and they sent it into the syndicate. And they didn't have a Facebook page, and they didn't have an email. And they talked to people on the phone. I was talking with our buddy Brett the other day, because we shared a studio for a while with Al Williamson, who had worked his whole life the same way, right? Just like the old cartoonists, right? And he passed away in 2010. So the internet had come into it by then, but he wasn't using it. So I just think like guys like Charles Schultz didn't say like, "Oh, sorry, I got a Zoom meeting. I'm sorry, I've got to go." What I mean? In the middle of his day, and
I got to fulfill these Patreon requests.
Right.
Yeah. Well, here, I mean, when I started at the paper in 76, what I drew on Monday was in Thursday's newspaper. So why, I'm not really sure that was ever entirely necessary, because when there was breaking news, they could get it in the next day or maybe the day after. But such was the loping gait of the news cycle back then, stories lasted. And you could count on people still knowing. I mean, I thought about it. Will this story still be in people's minds by the time the cartoon appears in the paper? But typically you went ahead and did it. Now, whatever, Tom Petty dies and you open Instagram and there's, 5 cartoonists tribute to him, within an hour. I mean, I don't even know how people are doing it. Not to sound like the old guy, but I sometimes wonder if contemplation has been lost because of the expectations for quick turnaround.
Yeah.
And that is one thing I have to say. I had that luxury of thinking for, a long time about a topic, and, at its best anyway, putting something thoughtful together on it. But, I think that would now be, you'd get lost in the dust if you did that.
Well, the 24-hour news cycle wasn't quite the 24-hour news cycle in 1999.
No.
Yeah. It was not, now everything everything is chewed at such a fast rate. In fact, today I'm loading on the New York Times and I'm going and looking at the Washington Post and I'm seeing what the UPI is saying and I'm going over seeing you're going back and everything is scrolling and being fed and there's like this massive machine that's owned by other massive machines.
Yeah,
needs all this material. And constantly, because if you don't have churn, then people they jump.
Yeah.
Sure.
Do you remember when on the news screen? I'm talking about TV now. You would have, there was, Tom Brokaw or Chet Huntley or whoever there, and they would be delivering the news. Then, quite some time later, there started to be a crawl across the bottom. Of a different story, not what the guy was talking about, but of a different story. And I remember resenting that so much. Wait a minute, I'm supposed to follow this and this at the same time? Yeah. Now you look at a screen and there's something going down the side and live comments popping up over here. And I don't know. I really, I always try to stop myself before I sound like that old guy who can't keep up. But I just don't know that my brain ever was trained to do all that at once.
Well, even watching cartoons, you used to be able to watch a cartoon. It would come up, it'd have the title sequence, you watch the cartoon, and then you have the credit, and there'd be a commercial, and then there'd be another cartoon. But now when you're watching a cartoon, you're seeing what's coming up next on the little bug at the bottom. So you can't even finish enjoying your cartoon because you have to have anxiety about that other cartoon that's coming up. And I think that like my whole childhood, I just watched, whatever cartoon I watched or program, it ended. You could go to the bathroom, get a drink of water or whatever. You didn't necessarily always know what was coming now, or you didn't have to hold that in your brain. And even when you watch some things, like now they would take the credits and shrink them down so they could have all those other ads running at the same time. And what that does to your brain when you're actually trying to enjoy or process what you enjoy.
I'm with you, Mike. I'm with you.
I have another one, and this is something that I've been thinking about for a while. And I just read that Tom Tolles retired not too long ago. It was probably like last week, right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And I've run into some young people who never understood editorial or mostly political cartooning. Like it seemed very outmoded to them, and I'm getting to a point. Kind of like, well, I don't get it. So the elephant says apartheid on its trunk, and then there's like blood, and it's just it's kind of like this kind of like cryptic type of iconography that is kind of outdated to them. But I think that's been replaced by memes. With young people, where they get the same kind of thing, maybe not as as political too. And I wonder what do you think about memes?
It's all ironic.
Say it again, Mike.
It's all ironic. It's all ironic.
Yeah.
Because political cartoons were not all ironic.
When someone first told me that memes would be the new version of editorial cartooning, that just did not compute. I thought, what we're talking about a photo somebody finds somewhere and writes something across. I mean, I still couldn't quote you a meme. I have enjoyed some. I have passed some along. I'm not against anything like that. And here's what I do like. I like that everybody's empowered to express themselves now. And if that's a way they can do it, fine. I do love watching the gatekeepers go away, over the course of the last decade. So power is not in the hands of us, white guys who, rose through the ranks to become editors and publishers. Now it's like what is that the word? Democratization, everybody who's got a worthwhile thought has a way to put it out there now. And I couldn't be more in favor of that. Memes themselves, I find a bit shallow. You can't go very deep with it. But sometimes they're on the nail and they can be funny. And I suppose the best ones would qualify in my mind as editorial cartoons of a sort. Yeah.
Well, we have the collection of the New York Times best memes.
I bet. Except it won't be printed.
Yeah, I mean, I have a bunch of old collections of every once in a while, I'd hunt through an old bookstore and you'd find like the best of some old political cartoons from England or some other place. Did you guys follow what the Europeans were doing at all? Because that's like a very different. It's less Warner Brothers or Mad Magazine, I guess I would say, in a way. It's a different type of. It's cartooning, but I don't feel like it doesn't come from the same root as many of us do here.
Right, but I ate all of that up. And I would venture to guess that you guys are the same, and most cartoonists we would get on here would say the same thing. There is a period of your youngish life when you are just voracious about seeing what's out there and who's doing what and what can you learn from who. You'd go to used bookstores. Philly must have had 100 of them. Cincinnati had a few. And you'd find this obscure thing, Gerald Scarf. What's he? Who's that? What's he doing? Well, who was Giles? Who was David Lowe? And you'd look at him and you think, oh my God, Oliphant must have looked at Lowe because he's before him, and he is, you see that. And you begin to develop the ancestral tree in your mind, and who learned what from who, and what are these different strains. And it was fun. It was intoxicating. I loved that. There comes, I think it's, in my case, I'll speak for myself, I think there comes a time when it's appropriate to put some of that away. I think that if I was soul searching, I would say that there were periods of time when I was too dependent on the people whose work I was learning from. You can't go to school for this. You have to teach yourself. And, in my early days, I was out there on the newspaper stage before I didn't know how to tap dance yet. And, you could almost look at a cartoon of mine and guess who I had looked at the night before. Here's a Mike Peters-ish cartoon. Here's a McNelly-ish cartoon. But I would say that that's all appropriate. That's fine. That's how you learn, as long as you're doing it with some integrity and in honesty, and you're absorbing what you have to learn from every one of these teachers. And but then, okay, for me, I'd say there came this little period where I was like, but that can't be all there is to just keep synthesizing these other people. What's beyond that, And that's when I, put the books away, And I started paying attention to how I was first jotting an idea down in my sketchbook before I was thinking consciously about how would I stage it and where would I place all this and in whose style exactly is this being drawn. It was more like, oh no, there you, I'm just, on the desert island, putting down my idea in a pure form.
Mm-hmm.
And I started looking at those sketches and saying, this is who you are. This is what you need to pay attention to. You can use all the tools you've learned from others, and that will be appropriate when you get around to the, directing this scene. But the essence of it came right out of your pen right there. Mm-hmm. And that's what you need to pay attention to. And I had a period of time when I would start a cartoon and realize it was going down somebody else's, it was kind of coming out of somebody else's pen, as it were. Mm-hmm. And I would stop and start over, and had some long and painful nights doing that. But it was a period of insisting that this be me. Mm-hmm. This be whatever it is I have to contribute. And so I worked my way out of it, and it is just so much fun once you get through those growing pains.
But it's hard. It's very hard to go to. It's just so easy to wear somebody else's shoes because it gives you an answer, a very specific answer artistically. To go, well, if I do more Drucker, I know that,
Right. You know that dance, right?
Yeah. And then you go, yeah. Well, if I don't want to do that, it's sort of like, well, I'm not sure whether what I'm dancing, which might be good, but you don't have that internal thing that you can trust yourself yet. That's something that I think a lot of cartoonists, whether you're doing political cartooning or anything else, you go through even as a painter, you go through the same thing, because you have to leave your heroes behind, and that's a very uncomfortable time.
It's like leaving your parents behind. It's painful. It's painful in your heart and soul. But it is. But you have to say to yourself, if I keep down this road, the best I will ever be is an inferior McNelly, or an inferior Oliphant, or Watterson, or whoever it might be. Mm-hmm. And how am I ever going to get at who I am and what I have to contribute if I don't make that break? So,
go ahead. No.
Oh, this is an interesting corollary between strips and editorial and comic books, because especially in mainstream comic books, there has been periods where there was a house style, right? Where people would come into gigs, and there might be soft nudges for things to look a lot like the last guy that was here. Right? Right. But that doesn't really exist in editorial unless it's in your head.
In your head. Yeah.
Nobody's going to say, like, now you're drawing the Conrad political cartoon. You know what I mean?
No, certainly not that. The only mini version of what you're talking about, Jamar, for me was more political philosophy. I walked into a conservative Republican newspaper, and as I sort of joked earlier, I really do think that the folks who hired me thought, well, this guy's just coming out of school. He's local. That might be a little leg up, on understanding the city. Mm-hmm. But basically, we'll mold him, to be a good little Republican cartoonist. Mm-hmm. And I was at the job for, almost immediately. I began feeling the dissonance in that formula. Mm-hmm. But within 2 to 3 years, I was getting on my feet and coming up with cartoon ideas that just didn't fit what they thought was going to happen. And I said to my editor, I understand that an editorial cartoonist is traditionally supposed to fit on an editorial page, And editorial pages throughout history have been a reflection of the publisher and owner's philosophy. And I get it. This isn't my press, it's your press. But I would appreciate it if you would let me know that now, because I'm starting to get other opportunities. And maybe I'd find a better fit if we just are honest with each other. So God, my editor went to the publisher, and they must have had a come to Jesus meeting of some sort. And the word came back, look, your name is on these things. We respect our readers enough that they will understand that your signed piece is not a editorial as might run next to it. If you're going to do good work, you have to believe in it. So go to it, and we'll stand behind you. This from a mediocre, medium-sized newspaper in Cincinnati, Ohio. I just always thought it was the wisest decision I could imagine. And that's why I spent my 32 years there. There were other bigger markets to go to, but these were people who were going to let me say what I needed to say. And not only let me, they also understood that I was going to bring readers to the page who wouldn't otherwise come.
Right.
And
so they welcomed a differing point of view, but you might have different editorials. I would take it like some liberal, some conservative, and they weren't like trying to stuff out the opposing.
No. The editorials on that page were almost consistently conservative, and right next to them would be my cartoon saying the diametrically opposite point of view, and they got comfortable with that, and I got comfortable with that. So, I mean, we came to have a wonderful relationship. I had a great working life at the Inquirer, and I tell that story a lot because I think people sometimes don't give newspapers credit for this sort of wisdom. I think it was wisdom.
Well, Jim, even in that period, in that point of your life where you said, "Hey, listen, I'm starting to feel itchy about this." Do you think that also was a decision made with youth on your side, right? Because like maybe if you were older when you came in, you may have felt like beholden to the paper for giving you work.
Could well be. Yes, that's right. I didn't have obligations much.
Right. You didn't have kids going to college and on your Volvo and
right. No, you're right about all that, and I know most people don't have the luxury of making all their decisions out of purity. But I have had a charmed career.
Was there a like a slow build of your reputation in cartooning circles? Like, did you hit a certain year where all of a sudden people started to sniff you out, or you were getting a lot of Cartoonist Society invites and things like that? How did that ramp up, or were you always in the mix with other cartoonists?
Well, there were a whole bunch of us who came online at the same time, a generation of us. You'd know the names, Mike Keefe and Dwayne Powell, and there were a ton of them. And I've always found that cartoonists were surprisingly non-competitive, at least in any commercial sort of way.
Sure.
It amazes me, truthfully. We're all fighting for the same real estate, if you boil it down. But I don't find that to be the spirit of among cartoonists I know. Everybody's pretty collegial and friendly, and you ask them what pen they're using, or how do you know anybody at King Feature Syndicate or whatever, and everybody just opens up their contact list, their book, whatever, and shares it with you. And that's always been my experience there. I think I got syndicated in 4 years after I started. So in 1980, I was syndicated by King Features, and I went to those various organizations. What was it called? The AAEC. Association of American Editorial Cartoonists. They had a meeting, a meeting once a year. Got to know everybody. And then in those days, quaintly, the mark of whether you were kind of rising in the field was if you got a cartoon in Newsweek. You know, they had a front page within the magazine where they would run, I think, 3 editorial cartoons. And if you got on that, that was a big deal. And then later the New York Times ran a thing on Sundays with 4 editorial cartoons in it. And that was another mark of status. And, you know, so those are the kind of trees you peed on, you know, in hopes of staking out some territory.
Yeah.
Right. Or if you're like Jack Davis used to do all those fantastic covers for Time and Newsweek, and then like, if you were doing the cover for Time and Newsweek, you were like king of the mountain.
I bet. Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
There's a question from our good buddy J. Robert Deans, who's a great cartoonist and writer in his own right, who asked a spicy question. Did you get pushback for your Mapplethorpe cartoon featuring David?
Oh, yeah. No, most people probably won't know what that refers to. A artist photographer named Robert Mapplethorpe was doing very controversial stuff. And a show of his work came to the Contemporary Arts Center in Cincinnati. And because it involved some, well, certainly nudity, but also controversial stuff, I wouldn't know how to characterize it, but it was around the edges of gay life in New York and things like that. Anyway, our sheriff, who was quite a character, Simon Lease, shut the show down. And he was a sort of famous puritanical force in Cincinnati. He had shut down the theater Hair, you know, the play Hair, which had a brief moment of nudity in it, and things like this. This was kind of, he was sort of he was like that sheriff in Arizona now.
Oh, Arpaio.
Yeah. He was aspiring to that. So anyway, that was a big deal. And when he shut that down, it set off a real firestorm. And so I was clear on where I stood on that. And I didn't want the sheriff telling me what should be in our art museums. And so I did a cartoon that J. Robert Deans is referring to, in which the sheriff has a wagon, and in it is the statue of David. And he is saying the sheriff is saying something like, I found this clown parading around in a homophobic, I've forgotten the details, but I found him parading around naked, you know. So I actually, you know, cartoonists are often asked, you know, did you ever change policy or anything like that with your cartoons? I have very few stories. I don't think many cartoonists have stories like that. But I really think I might have had some influence during the shutdown of this show, because I drew about it day after day after day. That cartoon in particular was among the 10 that I entered for the Pulitzer that year and won. So it was often singled out as the Pulitzer Prize winning cartoon from my portfolio. So
do you still have it? Do you still have a lot of your originals?
I have a ton of my originals. I couldn't tell you if I have that one or not.
But that's the Pulitzer Prize one. You're not sure? You don't have that one in like a golden frame with lights shining on it, like people can see from an airplane. Right here, here's the Pulitzer Prize cartoon.
There were 10 in those days. I think it's now 20, but in those days you entered 10 cartoons as your portfolio for the Pulitzer, and so it was one of 10 in the group that equally won the Pulitzer. So I know I have most of them. I don't.
Would people write in and ask for them? Would politicians write in and ask for them?
I gave away a lot of my work over the years. I thought it was a good use of it, truthfully, to give it to fundraisers and sometimes to the people in the cartoon. That would happen. But an awful lot to schools and things like that for their fundraisers. And I'm fine with that. I don't really need another stack of drawings around this house.
How would you go about like archiving your work? Because that's one of the things that everybody does has a long career. Like I'm sure you have thousands of strips by now, right?
I do.
Thousands and thousands. Because I mean, I've only been doing Judge Parker going on 11 years, and it's just like,
yeah, yep. Yeah, so I did political cartoons for 32 years. It probably averaged 5 days a week. I was doing 6 at one point, 4 at one point, but probably 5 times whatever 32 years is. And then ZITS, I've been drawing for 23 years.
Wow. Where does the time go?
Yeah. So yeah, there's a ton of work around, and I still do it the old-fashioned way. It sounds like you do too, Mike.
Well, I do it 2 ways. I do the Phantom traditional because there's a market for the strips. There is not a market for the Judge Parker strips, so I switched to doing Judge Parker all digital. So it took a while to kind of to do it. But I mean, like I said, I bought this armoire, and it was just filled with thousands of Judge Parker strips.
Yes.
And if I ended up doing it for another 10 years, I would have, you would be crowded out of your house by all that.
Yeah. And I don't know if this has happened to you guys or not. There was a period of time, I would say 20 to 25 years into my career, when if you started telling me a cartoon like that Mapplethorpe one that just asked about, I could bring it all back to memory. I could quote it accurately and remember the details of what it looked like, of almost everything I had drawn at that point. But then there came a point when it was like memory full, and now I can look at things I drew even 3 and 4 years ago and have no memory of them whatsoever.
Really? Wow.
None. Yeah. I got in, what do they say? Went into a wormhole or whatever about of my old editorial cartoons that happened to be online, and it was a curious thing to read my work as if for the first time, because I didn't have any memory of ever drawn it. And I could say, well, this is pretty good, or I don't know what that was about.
Jim, let me ask I have a couple more questions about your run at editorial. Just with the pressure of doing editorial, was your fuel always the deadline or the end of the day, got to get the stuff in? Because you seem like a really even-keeled person, so like how was your energy level through the day as it got later and later into the afternoon and it's time to get that strip in?
This would be the perfect time for my wife to walk through that door, because as the day got later, sometimes she would call to say, what time do you think you'll be home or something? And she does a hilarious job of imitating me. Like, I don't have an idea. I'll never have another idea. I wouldn't know what an idea was if it came and hit me over the head. I'll never be able to do this again. I would go into deep despair over the course of several hours. And I honestly, I don't look back at that with any fondness. That was tough. I had to be done around 5 o'clock every day. And I sometimes hit 4 o'clock with no ideas.
Yeah.
Wow. You're a fast drawer, what you're saying.
You develop that ability. Yeah.
No background on this one, just tone board. You must have gotten good at drawing the Capitol building really quick.
Yeah. Oh, I don't miss that. That can drill a hole in your gut.
Yeah.
So let's talk about ZITS. How did I know you were doing both at the same time for a long time,
Yeah.
right? So talk about adding on that extra plate.
So in 1997, Jerry Scott and I got together. It's a whole story unto itself. And we launched ZITS. And I was still at the Inquirer doing 5 a week for the editorial cartoons. So from the period 97 to 2008, when I left the newspaper job, what's that, 11 years, I was doing both. And I remarried in that time. I had 2 kids of my own I was raising by myself. Suzanne had 3. So when we got married, we had 5 teenagers in our house.
Wow.
And I was doing 2 jobs.
Plenty of source material.
Plenty of source material. They contributed generously to ideas for the strip. And yeah,
the ink backgrounds? Did you get them into ink back?
No, their contributions were in the form of saying ridiculous things and me drawing them. But that was a hectic period, 11 years of doing both jobs. Yeah. ZITS had to fit around the edges.
And how would you, because I mean, in general, you're supposed to be, which I've never been, you're supposed to be, I always heard the guys like Frank Robbins were like, they'd have 2 stories done, 1 story just sitting, 2 stories sitting, waiting to send in, because you were supposed to be like 13. Each story was about 13 weeks, and you were usually had to be at least 1 story ahead in the old days. That's what I heard.
Oh, man.
The buffer.
Yeah. Because that way you could say, like, I want to go take a vacation. Because cartoonists don't get vacations that often. Most of the old guys they'd have to get a ghost to do the strip. I don't know if that's the same with you. Do you have to get a ghost?
No, never did. Never did that. As a matter of fact, now my life is very cushy. I do half of a comic strip. Jerry Scott does the heavy lifting. If you ask me, he'd say I do, but I think he does. And we are, there's these old schedules the syndicates mail out to you. How far you're supposed to be 6 weeks ahead, I think, or 10 weeks ahead.
8 for the Sunday, I think, minimum.
8 for the Sunday, and we're 5 weeks beyond that right now. So that's partly pandemic. There's time on your hands, but we are altar boys. We're both very seasoned. Nobody enjoys playing with fire anymore. We just much rather work ahead and have them in the bank. And so we've got a really nice cushion now, and never have to I don't even think about deadlines anymore. They're beat before they show up. So it's nice.
But guys like Gary Trudeau are like trying to draw stuff like right before. I mean, he's right on the edge.
Yeah, I got one quick shot of that kind of adrenaline when the virus hit in March, and I suddenly panicked and thought, what have we got in the pipeline that's on its way to publication that will not be appropriate now? Big crowds of teenagers on the, in the house together or whatever. So we went through and weeded out, I don't know, probably added up to 2 weeks worth of material, just individual dailies and a few Sundays, maybe more than that. It just felt like they'd be real tone deaf if they were to appear a month later, So we made the decision, and then you have to backfill. So that was my little shot of like, oh, adrenaline, produce. But we made the decision not to draw everybody with masks every day. I know a bunch of folks had to, think through that.
We did. And the Judge
Barker. Yeah. Okay. Well, in my mind, I just asked myself, and Jerry, of course, had his own thoughts. If I'm a reader and I've just plowed through the first 2 sections of the newspaper with everything being about a pandemic, do I want that when I get to the comics page? And my answer was no. I'd like our characters to know it's happening. I don't want them to appear clueless.
Right.
But I don't really want to immerse readers in this every day. So we have done a smattering of cartoons with masks or mentioning social distancing, things like that, just so folks know that we're on the same planet with everybody else. But beyond that, life kind of goes on.
I have another question from JR.
Okay, I was just going to say that Terry Beatty, who is watching, we actually he decided, because he's doing Rex Morgan, who's a doctor, it's like one way you can actually kind of like not deal with it, right? And
That's
then on Judge Parker, when the new writer took over from the old writer, he moved it more into contemporary specific things, which Judge Parker was one of those cities where you never really knew the city. Like Central City, they would never say what the real name of the city was, but you're dealing with politics, and the people were having cell phones, and they're like, what year car were they driving? People don't age at the same rate in comic strips as they do in reality. Yet you would have a Christmas strip or maybe a birthday strip, and for years in the Judge, the previous writer Woody avoided any specific thing like that, except the people that have cell phones and stuff like that. Even in the Phantom, he has a cell phone, even though it's the same guy from the beginning in the 1930s running around. Now he has a cell phone, right? I mean, he fought Hitler. You know what I mean? There's that weird thing that happens in comic strips.
Yes.
Where, like Spider-Man met the Beatles, right? That kind of a thing, right? And it's the same. So maybe you can get away with it, maybe more in ZITS, because maybe it's more flexible, like High and Lois. I'm sure they have a cell phone in High and Lois or in Beetle Bailey, and he's always in the Army. But you have to sort of have time that. Did you guys have a discussion about like how do you update? How do you put the iPhone in? How do you put the iPhone 12 in, or do you put just like a generic phone? I mean, how do you balance all that?
Yeah, great questions, and I'll have to consult my policy book, but I don't think it's been written. We make it up as we go is the answer. I bet you do too. There comes a point when it no longer makes sense for the phone to have a curly cord coming off of it.
Right.
But we did debate, like, should Jeremy own his own phone? Do you remember this? Maybe, I don't know, is that 10 years ago? At what age does a kid have their own phone? If he has his own phone, does that imply that their family is more well off than we want them to read?
Okay, yeah.
If he doesn't have a phone, is that sort of false? You have to kind of keep your whatever barometer out there to see what is going to strike people as real now, and be in the flow with that. We don't make terrific efforts to keep up with every passing new idiom.
No TikTok yet?
We actually did do TikTok.
Oh, okay.
But they still say dude, and I don't know if anybody else in the world still says dude.
Yeah, that's evergreen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. It's one of the things I think about and wonder about. When we were doing this strip in the very beginning in '97, my son was 15. I knew what his friends dressed like. I knew how they talked. I knew what was on their minds. And then as each of the 5 kids went through teenagerhood, I was sort of the embedded reporter. I could let Jerry know, this is kind of what's on their minds. We didn't mind them for literal jokes, but it helps you stay in touch. And then he has 2 daughters too, and they've both grown into adulthood now. So we've lost our real boots on the ground sources. that kind of remind us what people are doing, and that's a concern. I'm 66, and Jerry's virtually almost as old, and at what point do you look up and realize, oh, I'm still drawing fenders on cars, or I'm still, I've lost touch with what the world is really like out there. I think we're still pulling it off. At least people tell us that, it feels like their family. But
if you draw a gang, they still look like the Sharks or the Jets.
Jim, here's a couple of things. The questions are starting to stack. So
okay.
I'll throw a couple of things up here. JRD asks, and this is interesting because we're at that point in the conversation. You used to observe the news for inspiration. Did you shift to malls for inspiration from ZITS? Right, so because now that your kids are aged out, so to speak.
Yep.
Were you kind of looking at young television or watching, kind of like MTV, or trying to find little kernels of youth culture?
There were a couple of funny stories around that. One, Jerry lived in California when we were starting, and I would go out and visit him from time to time. And one time we got this idea, oh, there's a high school right down there. We should go park outside the school and just see what kids are. So here's
you and Errol Flynn.
Two middle-aged guys sitting in a car outside a high school watching the people go by and making notes in our books, our sketchbooks.
There's those narcs again.
It's like, okay, you can't do this, guys. Yeah. We did eventually develop a few contacts in schools that our kids had gone to, principals who would say, oh, yeah, sure, you can come on in and hang around for a little while. And we'd try to do that discreetly. But you only pick up so much. I mean, one of the topics we revisit a lot is what does Jeremy look like? He's got this moppy hair that some people read as still a mullet. I insist it's just shaggy hair. But, should he be, do kids still wear big gym shoes like was, a big deal at one time? And, should he be wearing skinny jeans and these sorts of things? And, I think you can make little tweaks, but in the end, you've created a comic book character or a cartoon character who has a certain look. And you hope it's universal enough to just read as teenager. If we stray too far from that reading, then we're in trouble. If everybody shaves their head, then I don't know what he looks like to people. Right. Does he start looking like Archie wearing a leather sweater or something? I don't know if you become an anachronism. I don't think we're there yet, but it's out there somewhere. There must be a moment when you cross that line. So
I think in the case of both Jamar and I, since we teach, at least up until we were teaching, I was teaching high school, and I was teaching college classes and a high school class at the school. So I would see for the past 10 years what high schoolers were dressing like. And so I was sort of like boots on the ground, getting to see what they liked, what they were into, what they, how this has supplanted everything in the world to young people now, even more so than the computer. It's what comes on the cell phone. And that did help quite a bit, because you could also then have discussions with them, like, well, what do you like? Like, I would ask them every year, I'd ask them sort of like, what comics did they like? What comic strips did they like? What cartoon characters did they know? And, we're turning a corner where 10 years ago, everybody knew Calvin and Hobbes. But now that those kids are in their mid-20s or late 20s, and those parents are older, so that you shifted a generation of people, a whole generation of people have gone through. The new kids coming in may not know Calvin and Hobbes because they don't go through the bookstores and get, mom or grandma or somebody who read that stuff doesn't go, here's that collection of whatever, because this has supplanted all the access and pipeline to the world. That's everything comes for them comes through the cell phone.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. And there's an additional issue with cell phones, which is that in a strip, if you draw Jeremy holding his phone and looking at it, which seems to be almost every panel of every day, what is he doing? There is no tip off as to what he's doing. Is he reading text? Is he talking to Sarah? Is he doing an assignment? Is he Googling something? You know, it's all looks the same visually.
Yeah, that's a big issue I found with Judge Parker, because you were mentioning the old strips. Somebody was on the phone, the girl could be on the bed. You had all this
reading a book or writing something, or
right, and or like in the old soap opera, somebody would be on the phone, and then you'd have somebody behind them, kind of a thing. And this, like, everybody's just like this.
Yeah, that's it.
I could really get good at drawing a hand holding a cell phone.
I know.
But you're right, because then everybody's expression is like, what?
I saw a great New Yorker cartoon. I wish I could tell you who drew it. When the pandemic hit, there two people were walking in a cityscape, and they both got masks on. And one of them is saying to the other something along the lines of, another problem with masks is you can't tell which character in a cartoon is talking.
Oh, that's really smart. I like that.
Isn't that's so smart?
Go ahead now.
Okay, I want to try to get through some of these questions. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So Terry asks, I'm curious about the color process on the strip, as I think it has the best looking color on the comics page, Jim Borgman.
Wow.
Who gets the credit for that?
That is, thank you so much, Terry, for that. I think that credit would be split among three people. I did the coloring myself, in Photoshop through the first, I don't know, I'll say half of the run of the strip. Mm-hmm. Then a guy named Benjamin Kieran, he is Mike Peters' son-in-law, or was at the time Mike Peters' son-in-law, and Benjamin was carving out a little career for himself coloring newspaper comic strips, because you guys may remember at one point all of a sudden you were expected to deliver your strip in color as well as in black and white, and that had only been a Sunday thing up till then. So suddenly you had another, I don't know what it would be, another 6-8 hours of work to do every week. And I had hit some sort of wall where I couldn't do that. So got Benjamin, and he learned it beautifully. And I give him big credit for establishing kind of the look of the strip, the palette of the strip. And then I took it back over for a while. Life happened, and I did it for another, say, 3 years in there. And I recruited my brother, Tom, who had to do it now. He's done it for the last 2 or 3 years. And Tom had a whole career as a artist and art director at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. So he was deep in these things too, and has the whole eye for it. So he's adding his own twists. I see little things that maybe no one else sees that are sort of special to his style. And I like it. I think it's as good as it's maybe ever been now under him. So thanks for the compliment. I don't know if ever people notice these things.
We notice.
Yeah, I mean, it's really. I'm always arguing with working with King, because especially on something like The Judge or The Phantom, they're realistic, and you can't color them the same way you color Heathcliff. It doesn't work that way. You can't color Prince Valiant the same way you color Charlie Brown.
No, I bet. As a matter of fact, I could be wrong, but I think Benjamin colored Prince Valiant too.
Oh, okay.
I may be wrong, but he was really a bit of a maestro there, and people don't realize that that's who they're looking at when they appreciate some of your work. There are other people who help us make us look good in our work. You know, they deserve a shout out now and then. So I'm glad to do that. Yeah.
So wait a minute. I lost my place here. Hold on a second.
Do you draw the strip at the same size you've always drawn it at, or have you made it smaller?
No, I do it the same as ever, and I fuss and fuss and fuss over it. And then when I see it in its physical size, I think, why am I carving pixels off of eyeballs? You know, because that's of course the final step of the thing is you scan it in and then you tweak it and edit it and all that. And I'm still fooling with line widths and stuff like that at that point. And it's all just for me, I guess, because I like to think that when they show up in print in books, they might be appreciated at that level. And on the screen, you know, they can be blown up, and you want them to look good at that size too. So yeah, I spend way too much time on things like that.
So what is the original size that you work at?
I don't know what size this is, but this is it.
Okay.
So I think it's maybe 14. I want to say 14 wide and whatever, 5, 6. I don't know.
Okay, that's about the same size, I think, as you work on the 14 by 17 paper and cut it.
Yeah. Yeah, cut it in half. Yeah.
Okay, here I found my place again. Okay, so there's not the lightning round. We might be close to the lightning round where we get a lot of questions. But our good buddy Mark C. Robinson's a fantastic cartoonist, asks, are the ZITS character designs based on real people? You want to talk about that quickly?
They aren't very much so. When we designed would be a bit of a euphemism. The characters look the way they found their way out of my pen. But when we started, Jeremy, my son Dylan was 15, and so it was natural for people to wonder if it was based on him. He doesn't look like Jeremy in any way, except that I definitely took things like slouches and the way he drapes himself over chairs and you know, those kind of things were very much sort of Dylan / generic teenager of that era. But Jeremy himself just seemed to be kind of formed in my mind. I don't think we haven't touched on this story. When Jerry and I started, I was doing the editorial cartoons in Cincinnati. He was doing Nancy and Baby Blues in Arizona.
Wow.
And with Rick Kirkman. And Baby Blues with Rick Kirkman. Anyway, I got an invitation to come to Arizona in March to do a talk, and I called Jerry, the only person I knew in that area, and said, I'm coming in winter to Arizona. It seems a shame to just turn around and fly right back to Cincinnati for this lousy weather. What should I do in Arizona while I'm there, you know, to make a longer weekend of it or something? And he said, oh, you should go up to Sedona, which I had never heard of.
Yeah.
And he said, there's this place up there. You rent a little cabin. They have nice food, you know, feed you, etc. And you hike around these red rocks, and it's gorgeous. And very quickly, he had talked himself into coming along with me. So we rented 2 cabins in this place called Garland's in Sedona. And the only ground rule was, you know, we're not going to talk about cartoons. We both had it up to here with cartoons. We're done. You know, I mean, not done, but, you know, we got enough of that in our life. Let's just hang out as a couple of friends. So we did that for 2 days. We hiked and stuff. And then on the last day, he comes over to my cabin with his sketchbook under his hand. And he says, all right, I'm breaking the rules. I'm trying to do a comic strip about a teenager, and it doesn't look like it should look. So he showed me his sketches. And because he had been doing Nancy and Baby Blues, his teenage characters all were sort of big head, little body kind of characters. It was what he knew.
Right.
And I said, oh, that just isn't the way I'm experiencing my son. You know, he's sloppy and flopping all over. His clothes hang off of him. He droops himself over the furniture and blah, blah, blah. So I started just drawing in my notebook. And when I look back at that notebook, it was Jeremy. It was just, he looked virtually the same that first time I drew him as he does now. So anyway, that's a long answer to that question. People say that the dad looks a little like me, and I certainly feel comfortable when the dad is on stage. I feel like I know who this guy is.
Right.
The other characters are amalgamations of people.
That's really interesting. And I guess just thinking about when you're doing cartoons, which people could try to easily make a correlation, it kind of brings back the whole like Ketchum Dennis the Menace thing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so did you ever have any feedback from the kids about the strip? And there's a question in here about asking, did the kids ever give you a reaction about something? Oh, here it is. I'll put it. Our good buddy Eternity Forever says, were any of the children in the house surprised that you used something that they might have said or done in the strip?
This is the one case in which it's very convenient that young people don't read newspapers.
That's great.
We were always, to give an honest answer, we were always careful to, protect the innocent, or the guilty. But it's also true that I don't think my kids or many teenagers read the strip. I think our audience is older people, parents and grandparents mainly. We've gotten plenty of nice letters, nice correspondence from younger people, but I don't think that's our main audience.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get email from, or mail, I should say, from aspiring cartoonists?
These pipelines seem to have dried up to me. I don't know if that's your experience or if it's just, people don't know how to find me anymore. When I was at the newspaper, everybody knew how to find me. And
Yeah.
I had tons of young cartoonists come through. Dave Coverley came through. I could name others. And we'd always have great conversations. And, some people very kindly have, named me among the people who helped them develop some confidence in their work early on. But I don't know, I guess it's, how do you find a guy who draws a comic strip now,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't hear much of anything from anybody. I hear a bit through Instagram, and I suppose I could put an email address or something on the strip and invite feedback, but we haven't done that.
That's a double-edged sword.
That's a double-edged sword.
Well, I think there's a repeating theme in a lot of our interviews with other creators about gumption or moxie or sand or whatever you want to call it that propels us into careers. And it seems as easy as things have gotten, like I remember right when I was still trying to break in and I wanted to do comic strips, people started putting their email addresses on the side of their strips. Mm-hmm. Like they're mostly all AOL accounts, but that was happening.
Yeah.
And I think I emailed every cartoonist because it's an invitation. Most people don't think that way, right? And just the idea that there's so much access maybe does the opposite to people.
Well, I have to tell you something, Jamar, that do you know the name Jay Kennedy?
Yeah.
You probably everybody who was inside the business knows it. Jay was the legendary editor at King Feature Syndicate, and he was there during our formative days with ZITS. But I asked Jay once, of all the submissions you get, rumored to be piles and piles, weekly in those days, to get a comic strip syndicated. If you look at the best ones, the ones who finally succeeded, what do you see in common among the people who submitted those? And he said the one thread is that everybody reached out to a cartoonist when they were trying to get into the business. I thought that was fascinating. You know, it implies a certain level of dedication to finding people. And I certainly had to screw up my courage to ask people, you know, it took a lot to get over those hurdles for me. But I love that answer. I think it's really true. It indicates a desire, you know.
And it was much harder 10, 15 years ago, before everybody was so accessible on the internet, because, you know, I grew up in Michigan, and when I was a teenager, the only time I would ever see a cartoonist would be if I went to a local convention, and then there might be one or two or three, sometimes, you know, you'd be lucky. But it was like, I didn't know how to get a hold of people. People didn't have, maybe you would write and somebody would be nice and write back, but you didn't even know where to write. Like I know there's a lot of people you might like, but you didn't know how to write to them because you didn't have their address.
No, you'd write in care of their publication, you know, and I did that twice at meaningful moments in my young life. I wrote to David Levine, who I told you I admired his work, and he asked him all those dumb questions. What kind of pen do you use? How long does it take you to do it? All that stuff. And do you know that man wrote back a handwritten 6-page letter to me answering every question. It was just a beautiful thing to do. Such a generous act. And the other one was to Jeff McNelly, who was, you know, a rising rock star at the time. And I knew he worked for the Richmond News Leader, it was called. And I just wrote in care of that newspaper, and he wrote me back and just a scrawled little note. But, you know, hey, I like this one you sent me, you know. And man, that puts wind in your sails for months, if not years. You know?
Yeah. And that just, it keeps repeating itself and gives so much. And I think that's something that's lost now, when I guess maybe with the advent of email and how things are just fired off so quickly.
Yeah.
And just the power of a letter means so much.
And, you know, Jerry and I have joked about this. Sometimes when our email address was more prominent, I can't remember, the syndicate may have had it on a splash page or something. Anyway, people were reaching out to us, as you said, Jamar, so casually that we'd get things like, hey, you did this one about the shoes being in the middle of the room. Like, would you just send me that because I lost my copy? It's like, what do you think I am here? You know?
Yeah.
But it came to that level of just such accessibility that the specialness was lost.
Yeah, it's flipped. Yeah.
I remember when I first started doing The Judge, Woody Wilson, who was the writer at the time, told me, don't go read the message board. Stay away from the message board. And it was bad then, and it is absolutely the worst now. I mean, I don't know if you ever go look at the message board, but it's amazing because there's been a couple times on Judge Parker where I've actually had to censor the sexy women that I've drawn for the editor at the Washington Post, who seemed to have a mad on for how I drew. And I mean, I wasn't drawing, you know, nipples or anything. You know, I was just drawing a sexy gal, which has always been in the strip. But the stuff people say on the message board is way more X-rated than I would ever be able to do in the strip.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. No, that's toxic. That's a bad idea to read those comments. It's just too easy to, well, it's the whole world now. It's just too damn easy to ruin everybody's day. And
when you were working on, you know, did you get comments? Were the comments different than when you started the strip, or like even when you were doing the political cartooning? I'm sure probably people would get mad and write you in and go, you know, that was a horrible thing. How dare you?
But But it was different, Mike, because in the editorial cartooning, I mean, I was putting my opinion about the news in front of people before they had their coffee in the morning. I expected people to respond and tell me what they thought. And I always considered that very fair and part of the territory, and I welcomed it. And over the years, I developed a sort of dialogue with Cincinnatians where, they swam right in general, I swam left, but we all were civil. Generally speaking, people were civil. And there was a line that people didn't tend to cross. Didn't become personal. They might really be pissed off at you or what you said in your cartoon, but it was still all within the realm of like a reasonable debate. And that's what's changed. And I don't know how you ever get back to that world. But it just seems like, wait, I'm just giving you a funny little idea here today. You don't have to throw your crap at me for doing that. I mean, I'm not trying to provoke you or make you mad. I'm trying to give you this little gift, and you're tossing your trash out the window at me. And it has definitely soiled the experience of being in the public eye.
Do you find other cartoonists feel that way too? You've talked to other cartoonists that feel that way?
Yeah, I think I think it's a universal experience. Do you hear anything other than that? I mean,
right, yeah, but I sort of think that I assume that the soap opera strips, because there's not that many, there's the Judge and Rex Morgan and Mary Worth and stuff. I know that that's sort of ripe for people to make jokes at it, snark on, but I would think, that it wouldn't necessarily apply to Wizard of Id or you know what I mean? People wake up in the morning and look at Wizard of Id and like, God damn it, that Wizard of Id ruined my day again, Mama by Mel is just, I don't want to go shoot my dog.
I think it comes back again to the accessibility of the internet. Like, it takes effort to lick the tip of your pen and write a letter to the newspaper to complain about, Henry.
That's the one I hate the most, Henry. Say something.
Say something, damn it. Right, but just the internet, you just fire things off, and it almost takes away some of the responsibility there.
Yeah.
Here's one to bring the room back around. That was a good little moment we had there. Eternity Forever says, Jim, have you ever snuck something into a strip just for fun that the syndicate wouldn't have liked?
So the way we have played around those edges is that, well, first of all, the direct answer is that for a long time you could not say the words suck, blow. Nothing can suck or blow. And there was another one, suck something or blow. Anyway, they're innocent words, but it was not considered appropriate, vocabulary. Now we're talking about a comic strip about a teenager, and at that time we're sort of fighting for some street cred, and so we really wanted that, and we would always, try to get those words in there when appropriate, and they would fight back and stuff.
Jay Kennedy era.
Jay, yes, and you probably know Jay had a great collection of underground comics. He was not a prude, but he knew what the company, he was working for, would say. So he had to be the bad guy who told us sometimes to take that out. But the way we have had fun over the years is sometimes when we have Sarah, our character Sarah, talking, she just talks really fast. And so the way we've said that is like we'll write out the dialogue, but then we'll pile it on top of each other. So there's like layers of words on top of each other, and it becomes something you can't read, but you get the feeling of a very fast talking teenage girl. And so there was a copy editor at King Features named Evelyn, who just retired a couple of years ago. But I think it was Evelyn's job to make sure there was nothing in a strip that was not supposed to be there. And so she would go through, became a kind of a joke between us, because she would think, oh, I bet these guys are hiding something in this, in these mashed up words. And so there was never anything hidden in them. Not a single controversial word. But it always looked like we were trying to hide something. And I bet she went blind trying to figure out what those words were and whether we were sneaking anything past her.
Here's something interesting. Let me run this real quick. This is interesting. Eternity Forever says, Frank Cho, when Frank was doing Liberty Meadows in the newspaper, I was thinking of University Square, hated that he couldn't throw women in a bra, but there are bra ads in the next page of the paper. Now, it's interesting with Cho, because Cho was really frustrated by his syndicate. And there's a generation probably after you guys, Jim, who weren't, the stickiness of having a comic strip deal wasn't there the way it was with earlier generations. Like Magruder quit the Boondocks. I think Cho quit Liberty Meadows after not too long, and it just didn't seem to have the same kind of currency that it used to. I don't know if Waterson started the waters there by fighting back against, the papers on, the size of his strips and stuff. But I wonder how you feel about that.
I can only guess that if you could talk to those folks, that it wasn't commercially enough of a payoff for them to be maybe what they would say compromising their work for. I guess I'd say I've been fortunate in the sense that I don't have a strong need to do those sort of things. It's just not where my jollies lie. Yeah. So I haven't had a whole lot of issues with that. But if you're struggling along, with just a few newspapers and now you can't even, be funny in the way you like to be funny. Right. That's got to take a lot of the.
Well, it's funny that you brought up the thing about wearing the bra, because there's been several scenes where the girls in The Judge, Sophie is the youngest one, who's like 16 or 18 now because she just graduated from high school. And then the Phantom, he has the twins, and Heloise is 16. So you have these scenes where they're changing, and you want to make it sexy because people want to see sex. But there's that line at which you go, what you think is appropriate, what the syndicate, which it's not even the syndicate, it's their clients. So some papers would never complain. Other papers would complain. And so there's been times, like I said, specifically for the Washington Post, I've had to make changes to some of the women, and once even take a gun out and stuff, where there'd actually, within the previous year, there'd been other scenes that had guns. And then you look at the Alex Raymond stuff from the 50s and Leonard Starr, the guys who were doing stuff in the 50s and 60s, way more sexy, way more. So it's funny how, that person would say stuff like, yeah, you would see murder and blood and sex and death on page, section A through B, and then you get to the comic section, and it's this bucolic fantasy world. I guess Dick Tracy can't pull his gun out anymore, that kind of thing. And I think that you also sort of insult the readers when you do that too, because that's not a world that they believe in, and right, you don't expect Charlie Brown to pull out a Thompson submachine gun and shoot the Great Pumpkin. But, I think in a soap opera strip, you got to have some soap. And in a detective strip, you got to have, even if it's as violent as an old, 50s TV show. I think that if you take that out, then you take out what's interesting in the strip.
That makes total sense to me. You got to judge each one, what's appropriate in each one. They each have their own kind of rules. The blowback we would typically get is just, hey, kids are reading this. Now, I don't even know if that's really true anymore. And I don't know.
They wouldn't be offended. No kid would be offended by suck or blow.
Yeah, right.
Hey, Jim, I'm going to start wrapping you up. We've had a fantastic time talking. We have had a couple questions left for you, and then we'll start heading you towards the exit.
Okay.
Going back to your studio a little bit, maybe want to talk about your setup, as far as your tech that you're using. And Mark asks, what size paper do you draw the Sunday strips at?
So the Sundays, shoot, I should have brought out a pile of them. I didn't think to do that. I use that standard 11 by 17 Strathmore Bristol pad, that you buy, and then I have, just like everybody does, these cardboard templates I've been using for all these years. You trace the little line around it and mark off the panels that way. The Sundays, I think you asked about specifically. I'm sorry, I didn't measure. I didn't do anything like that. But it's this, it's essentially that. So they kind of fill the paper edge to edge, and then there's room on the above and below it.
So you work to the size that will fit on your scanner?
Yes, I have an 11 by 17 Brother scanner. If you're into the details, it has a plate, that'll accommodate that 11 by 17 page, so I don't have to do any pasting of it together. Scan it, clean it up in Photoshop. I don't know. How's that? Is that
yeah? We're process junkies.
I love it that you are.
Yeah.
One of the things, I feel like you guys are the like the godfathers of art supplies and stuff. And I'm always, you hear people say like, ever since they changed the formula of their ink back in '89, and I think, how do you have like moles inside of, Pelican or something who tell you these things?
Loose lips, big ships.
That Higgins ink is garbage.
Yeah. But I experience it. I mean, those of us who do develop that finesse with our tools care about these things. And the little wrestling match that goes on every day in this studio is, do I have to add a drop of water to this ink to get it to flow because it feels gummy? Is it my brush? Did I not clean it right? Is it just worn out? All those kind of things they make the difference between an enjoyable day where everything just, skates like magic, or you fight the paper all day long.
Yeah, I have a couple. So I don't know if you do, but I always collect old comic strips as well, because that's one of the ways I learned in the beginning. As soon as I started making money and I would go to a show, I'd be able to buy strips and study. And so earlier in this year, I bought a bunch of strips by Leonard Starr.
Wow.
Those are gorgeous.
Look at that.
And he was an all brush inker.
Yeah.
And then and now you letter your own strip, but I know that some of the syndicates guys who lived in Connecticut would all have one guy would go around and he would.
I remember hearing that there were lettering guys who would do many strips. Yeah,
and they would go around and letter a whole bunch of the strips. And so now, we didn't really touch on it, but like you learning how to letter. That wasn't an important thing for you, right? To learn how to letter and to letter legibly, I guess I should say, because if it's not consistent, it makes people's eyes tired to read your work.
Well, the backstory on that, my God, those are jaw dropping.
Those are what stages.
Wow.
Yeah.
My dad, as his job, lettered signs. He was a sign painter. And I grew up standing behind him, watching him form the letters, hand painting, letters on signs and guessing what the sign was going to say, watching him strike off the dots to indicate how much space was between each letter, that W's were wider than, N's or, all that stuff. And of course, you couldn't fix it in Photoshop if it was enamel on metal. So, he had to get all that right. And I think I just osmosed this sense of lettering as an art form and developed my chops there without even realizing I was doing it. And so I used Micron 08 pens to do my lettering, and have the advantage of, on the screen, I can move the letters back and forth like that guy couldn't. And I take advantage of all those tools. Otherwise, I'm pretty old school. I too draw with a brush, a Winsor & Newton Series 7 number 3. And currently I'm using Winsor & Newton black ink. And I still use whiteout now and then.
Do you draw digitally at all? Like, do you have a Cintiq or anything like that in your studio?
I don't have that. The closest I have is a little Wacom tablet, and that is, and a stylus, and that is how I do the cleanup on the strips and how I colored them when I was coloring them. I still color book covers and things when we do a collection. So I can still do it.
Now, do you pencil first in blue and then tighten up or do you you keep it loose and then you tighten it up when you ink it?
Neither of those. I draw with a regular lead, pencil, and then, but I do pretty tight roughs, or a tight line pencil drawing, and then I ink over that with a brush, and then erase with the soft eraser, when it's dry. And then sometimes physically clean up with whiteout if I think. Sometimes people still want originals. And I do have a little gallery connection, a very modest thing where people can get them if they want them. And so I try, it has to look like a drawing for me while I'm doing it. Even though I know I have that safety net where I can clean it up later, I just prefer it.
That's what Al Williamson would say, that he worked for the original. He worked for the original that he worked on. And it's also funny because my grandfather was a display letterer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he had in his basement, he had this big table that would go up and down, for doing big political signs or things that you do in like car dealerships, all that stuff. Like as a kid, all that stuff I would see in a supermarket, all the sign was all done by hand. They had guys would letter all that stuff. And the story was my grandfather learned to do that during the Depression, taking the one ads and turning them sideways and practicing.
I breathed that stuff growing up. I think my sister is watching. She would tell you our car, our house, our everything smelled like enamel and turpentine. and one shot. I think it was called one shot's right. It was called that, one shot. I've forgotten that. Yeah. And my dad had a rest stick, a metal pole, a thin metal pole with a cloth knob on the end.
Yeah, malt stick.
I forgot that was the name of them. And you would rest that on the cloth on the sign, and then it would he would rest his hand on that, and it helped him, as he moved them both in coordination to form the letters. And it was a beautiful thing to watch.
I still have an old book from my grandfather. It was an old display lettering book that actually showed how you could do cards for tonight's special, for like a restaurant, or lobby cards. I guess they called them lobby cards.
Okay.
And you would do all the fancy little embroidery or little decorations around stuff. And he had different kinds of pens that would give you like 3 lines and things like that.
Yes.
So I saw that as a kid, and I knew like what some inking nibs were, and then I would see those and like, how do you draw with this big
I know,
like a rake, you know?
I know. And they'd put those I don't know what they call it, a drop shadow behind the letters or something, you know, and you had to learn how to do that.
Yeah. I saw, I follow a couple of different creatives on Instagram, and one of them is, I guess you would call them a calligraphist, but her whole gimmick is that she does wedding, you know, kind of like wedding stuff. And she, in her studio, there's nothing but mirrors, and she does kind of like the seating arrangements and everything on a mirror with a white paint marker, and just does the most beautiful, confident, just loopy things, you know, with no net. It's gorgeous.
Yeah. Well, you know, handmade things like that are becoming valued again.
Yeah.
And if my dad was alive, you know, he would be revered by hipsters who, you know, if they saw what he could do, it was old world kind of skills, you know. He would do the sides of trucks, you know. I remember he would drag me along sometimes when he'd do these jobs, and there was a moving van called Boone Movers, Boone, and so he had on one side this 40-foot, you know, trailer. There's Daniel Boone, full length, you know, with a rifle. And that rifle goes down the side of the truck and across the back of the truck and up the other side of the truck. And then there's a big bear on the other side.
That's amazing.
And you know, he could pull that stuff off like a man.
So he was like, he had his own business, and I guess he had contracts, I guess. See, now they would just get a laser printer and they'd print the thing out and
do a wrap, do
a wrap on it,
But there was a story in the last couple of years. There were people that used to go around and paint signs on barns, or would paint what is it, that chewing tobacco,
mail pouch,
and there was a guy who painted by hand mail pouch signs on barns.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fading art, but I have very many fond memories around it.
So did you, when you started, did you do the strips bigger and then shrunk them because you were doing on your scanner, or did you always do them that size?
I think always the same size. I don't know, you know, I don't remember any adjustments along the way. I think the way I learned what size to make them was I took a comic strip physically out of the newspaper and measured it, and then just, you know, how you draw it big, you know, that diagonal line to make it bigger. I just guessed. You
reverse engineered it. I love it.
Right.
So they didn't say, well, this is the size, or you didn't look at an old Peanuts or something and go, oh, okay, that's how.
I didn't have it. No, I didn't have it. An awful lot of what we do, we just figure it out.
Here's my last tech question, and then we're going to let you go. With the advent of all of this technology, did you ever feel, you probably already answered the question in our last conversation, about maybe turning some of your stuff in, like automating things, like turning your handwriting into a font, or, you know, maybe doing things in blue lines and printing them out and inking them?
You know, I think somebody has done that with my lettering. Somebody sent me a file that says like ZITS font on it or something, and I guess I could have put that in and started using it. But you know, I just tell you, I think the lettering is like a character in this strip. And you know, I try to capture the inflections of what a person is saying by making this word just a little bigger, a little bolder, or square off the edges of the letters, you know, to give it just a little more emphasis. And you know, I think about, you know, how should the lines run so that it reads naturally, you know, not just what will fit. And I wouldn't give that part up. I think that I don't know how much it's lost on people or if it's appreciated, but for me, it's all part of the art of making these things as good as I can make them.
Yeah.
And that's just where I plant my flag.
Jim, I'm going to leave you with this. You've been fantastic.
Yeah, so great to talk.
Our new friend James chimes in from YouTube and says, Lisa, 59, and my dad, 88, are tuned in tonight. We are big fans. The relationship between Jeremy and his mom was so on point. It's crazy. Thank you so much for keeping us smiling and laughing.
Thank you, Lisa and Dad. That makes my day. Those are the comments that we live for and work so hard for. And when I'm shaving pixels off of eyebrow to get just the right expression, that's why we're doing it, you know?
Yeah.
Some of the best comments have come from folks who tell us how these little stories fit into their lives. And I can't really, it's a magical thing that you just visit for a moment every day, and somehow or other you end up with this heart-to-heart connection with people. And you know, when we hear stories about, you know, oh, this reminds me of my son, he died in Afghanistan or something, you know, these wrenching stories, sweet stories. I had a guy in an elevator once, a really old man, said to me, that kid you draw, he reminds me of my son. And I took a beat and I said, mind my asking, how old is your son? And he says, he's 65 years old. He just retired.
Wow.
But you just, you know, these things reverberate around once they leave your hand, and you don't know what they're doing out there in the world. And then now and then these stories come back about how people have taken them into their hearts, and you know, they mean the world to me to hear them.
Yeah, I think that people, you know, they always do that thing. I'm sure you see it all the time, where some feature editor decide, like, well, we're going to get rid of these strips. Where nobody wants to read these stinky old. We'll just put a bunch of tire ads in there, and people write in and go, if you get rid of the strips, I'm canceling my subscription to the paper.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that, you know, if you got rid of the comic strip, it would get rid of that little, like you said, this little intimate moment that you have every day. Because reading a strip is organic, and you process it at an individual way. It's not like watching TV or even listening to the radio or watching something on YouTube, which is kind of pushed at you. You absorb a strip and maybe read the other one and then maybe go back. You know, it's a very organic thing.
I love what you just said, Mike, and I love your word intimate. It's perfect. It is, you know, these are the tiniest of stories, little interchanges between a mom and her son, a guy and his wife, you know, whatever, or a couple of friends. They couldn't be smaller. You know, the story you're telling that day, nobody typically is shouting at the reader. You know, you're just visiting with, oddly enough, real people who are entirely fictional, but that's the way it feels, I think. And I have that relationship with strips I grew up with, and you know, they mean more to me than you know, as much as characters in novels or movies. You know, so we do something special. We really do. It ain't death of a salesman, you know, but it's got its place in people's lives.
Yeah, for generations.
So you do it as well as you can.
Yeah, my dad was more excited about me taking over the Phantom, which he was a huge fan of as a kid, than anything else I've ever done.
I bet. I bet. Yeah.
And I say, he's the same guy, Dad. He's the same. He's 109.
But he's got a cell phone.
Right? Yeah. You know.
That's great. Well, you guys are just the best. It's really
thank you so much, Jim. Yeah. Jim, do you want to hang out with us as we close the show out?
Sure.
It'll take a couple seconds. Yeah. Guys, thanks everybody so much for hanging out with us tonight. We're blessed with the presence of Jim Borgman. Jim is one of my and our good buddy John Morrow over at Tomorrow's Publishing, who publishes Draw Magazine. Thank you guys so much for your sponsorship. Thank you guys for tuning in. I want to give a plug for next Wednesday's guest, Keith Knight.
I love Keith.
Yeah, Keith, I hope everybody has watched his show, Woke, on Hulu, and are a Patreon patron of him. He's a great guy, and we go back a long way. I can't wait to catch up with him next Wednesday.
Cool.
So,
I'll be there too. I'll watch.
You hear that, Keith? Jim Borgman's watching. So, all right, we're going to say goodnight. Thank you so much. Thanks to my co-host, Mike, for Jim and myself. This has been Pencil to Pencil, and you know what we do next, guys? We're going to wash those curvy hands. Have a good night, you guys. Take care.